1942 in New Jersey. Bring me back to when you were a little kid. What do you remember growing up?
Well, I remember we lived at 623 Wyoming Avenue in Maywood, New Jersey. My parents were hardworking. There wasn't a lot of money. My dad was a teacher, and he made the first year he started teaching, he made $500 for his yearly salary. My mom stayed at home. My dad was a football coach, and he coached at Hasbrouck Heights, New Jersey for almost 20 years. He had 18 state championship teams. I remember he asked for a raise for coaching, and they wouldn't give it to him. I don't know what he made for coaching at that point after 20 years, so he decided to retire. He went back to college and got his administrative degree and became a middle school or junior high principal. And I remember I must have been maybe in fourth grade. I overheard my father ask my mother, her name was Ida, Ida, can you go back to teaching or we'll never, ever be able to afford to send our kids to college? My mother was a math major in a day and age when women didn't go to college. She was the only female in the math department at Montclair State, New Jersey. So she went back to work, and I had to take care of my sister Alice, who was 6 years younger than me. So I would wait outside in the morning, and a bus would come to pick her up to take her to nursery school. My parents were always involved with us. They worked hard, and my dad did a lot of different jobs because there was no money. I remember asking him for lunch money sometimes, and he said, I don't have anything. So then you had to make your lunch to take it to school. And when I was in junior high school, I had to walk home for lunch. My parents tried to get me to stay for lunch, but a mile was the cutoff, and we were just a block short of a mile. I would rush home. I would take a can of SpaghettiOs, cook them, gobble them down, and rush back. And I always had horrible pains in my stomach from eating and rushing around. I'll never forget that. We played a lot of stuff on the street. I was pretty much the only girl on the street. And we had Danny Valentine at the far end of the street, and he was the first house on the street that got a TV. So every afternoon we'd all go down at Danny Valentine's house, and we would watch Disco Kid, Hop Along Cassidy, and I was in second grade when we got a black and white TV that had 3 channels on it, and at midnight it would always shut off and they would play the national anthem. We used to play around the street. We'd play out, we'd play stickball, we'd play baseball, and then we'd play cowboys and Indians. I had a cowboy and Indian outfit. I had a woman's like Dale Evans, and we all had cap guns. And we'd shoot the cap guns at each other and would run all over the neighborhood. I remember sitting on fences, and cowboys and Indians, we did that. And then there were new houses going up on the street, and there were 2 piles of dirt from the houses. And so all the neighborhood kids would break into 2 teams and would get behind the dirt piles and throw rocks at each other. We also played cut the knife. We had like the little knives that you would have as a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout, and we would take a square and put a square down in the dirt, maybe a foot and a half or almost a yard, and we'd throw the knives down on the dirt, and then we would take a line and we would put our initials, that was our territory, in the dirt. And everybody then would try to take your territory by throwing their knives in there. That wouldn't go to nowadays. My father was a first generation on his side, and they came over in, I believe, around 1898 from what was then Austria-Hungary. It is now the country of Slovakia. They spoke Slovak, broken English, and my father was one of 9 children. He was in the middle. My grandfather, I think, was what we called a pipe fitter. And my grandmother, of course, stayed home with all the children. My mother was first generation. My grandmother came from the Netherlands as a 3 or 4-year-old. And my grandfather was German, but he was a merchant marine, so we spent a lot of time in Liverpool, England.
What was high school like? Sports, anything like that?
We had to go to another town for high school because Maywood only went up to 9th grade, and we had to go 2 towns away. It was probably not my favorite time in life, not because of the school itself, but we had to take a public bus there. So we had to walk to the public bus, and those are the days when you had strap hangers and people were allowed to smoke on the bus. I hated it, absolutely hated it. There were no girls' sports whatsoever. You could stay after school and play sports as girls, but then I had to take like a 4 or 5 o'clock bus home, and it would take more than an hour for me to get home. The last couple years of high school, we did have school buses. But if you didn't get on the school bus in 2 minutes from the late bell, bus would leave without you. Science was my favorite thing in the world. And Latin, which is very difficult, helped me with my sciences. And then we would, in our school, I wanted to take what we call typing. I had personal typing in junior high, but I wanted to take business typing. And in that day and age, you were either college prep or you were business. And they wouldn't let me take business typing because I was on the college area. My aunt taught business in a nearby school, and she knew the business teacher. I ended up taking typing, and it was one of the most valuable things I've ever taken. In college, people were pecking at the typewriter, and I could finish in 1/4 of the time. At that time, I was typing about 55, 58 words per minute. And then I took public speaking as a senior elective. And the public speaking teacher she was fabulous. And we had a lot of football players in the class. So when we got to the poetry section, she introduced us to Robert Service of the Yukon Territory. And he wrote a lot of poems, and I still love them, about the gold rush and all that. We were given our 4 or 5 majors. And then if we had blanks, we were assigned a study hall. And we had to go to the special area teachers and sign up to be art, music, home ec, sewing. And I spent all my free time in the sewing section. Ended up, having a dressmaking business and things like that later on. And they would bring in models and teach us how to model, and we would have fashion shows. And when we moved down here to Florida many years later, one of the stores in town had me modeling for them.
Tell me a little bit about college. Where'd you go? What'd you
I
study?
went to, and I have no idea why I picked this college. I picked Springfield College in Springfield, Massachusetts. It was the International YMCA College. It had been mainly a male college, and maybe 7 or 8 years before I got there, they made it co-ed. I had a double major. I had physical education and biology. And the first week I was there, I met my future husband. Didn't know it was a future husband at that point. And I remember we had freshman orientation week, and we were sitting in this great big room with windows all around, looking out over a lake. And leaning against the back windows was this very handsome man. And I asked my freshman week leader who he was. And she said, "That's my boyfriend's best friend. Would you like to meet him?" And I met him. And 4 years later, we got married. He was a year ahead of me. He played football in college. He was what we used to call a defensive end. And he majored basically in history, which he taught later on. And he got a master's degree. I graduated magna cum laude. And I worked very hard because I knew it was really hard for my parents to pay for me to go to a private school. Choosing Springfield was probably the best thing I ever did in my life. Not because I met Bill, I mean, that's the main reason, but they really, really cared about you as a person. Every professor made sure you were on task. They took personal interests in you. And my senior year, I took class that you had to learn how to use movie cameras and all that, because we didn't have what we had today. And Bill was the teacher's assistant for the professor teaching that class. And there were a lot of physics in that class. We had to learn how sound worked, how light worked, and physics is not my thing. So we had to take a lab test where you would go around, and Bill was the one giving the exam. How does this work and how does that work? And then I went to see one of my girlfriends. I said, "I have to ace the final exam. I just have to." And I graduated in June. I don't remember the exact date. One weekend in June, and Dr. Martin Luther King was the speaker at my college graduation. He had been in jail in Connecticut, and they got him out of jail and they brought him up to speak at the college graduation. Now, none of us realized the importance of having him till many years later. And then after college, I remember I was student teaching the fall semester in Connecticut, and I went back to campus, and Bill said, "We're going over Christmas, we're going out to Eastern Long Island for an interview." They were so desperate for teachers in the Northeast that they would send schools up to the college, and you could sign up for an interview and find out about it. So over Christmas vacation, Bill had come to New Jersey, and we went out to Long Island for an interview, and it was a farmhouse. We were way out. It was mostly farm country at that time. And so we were both offered a job the following year, and we were the first ones in both our classes to be offered a job. I was teaching physical education in the elementary school, wasn't my thing. The following year, I transferred to the junior high, and I started graduate school because in New York you had to have a master's degree to teach. And they gave you so many years to get it. And then we were working for a year and a half, 2 years, and then we had a house built in Bellport, Long Island. And we moved into the house. And we continued to work. And then we had applied for child adoption. We were not able at that time to have children. And we were going along with that. And then Bill got drafted, and his draft board was Milton, Massachusetts, because even though we lived on Long Island, at that time of life, you could not change your draft board. Now I believe you can. And that was in January, and the school district intervened and asked if he could finish the year out. So by the time he was actually drafted, he was over 26 years old, I think, or right around that. And he went to basic training, and he was sent to Vietnam for a year. And because he was older, he had a master's degree. He seemed that he was given a lot more responsibility than the E5 sergeant rank he had. And it was all good. Whatever was bad was put on the shelf. We used tape recorders. They were little tiny, old, round, portable tape recorders. And we sent them back and forth. But his unit, wherever he was, didn't have regular electricity. They had a different kind. It may have been whatever. And so when he would talk, because the megacycles or whatever they call them were different, so I couldn't recognize his voice. It was very low and very slow. And I had saved those, but I don't know where they are. I was going to have them transferred to tape or something, but they got lost, I guess, in the move. I remember getting information from him that he was making more money because now he was a demolitions expert. So he was sent every morning to minesweep, and he was sent into the jungle to snipe. But he came home, and it was his unit 3 weeks later that went into Cambodia. And he said that we were watching on TV. He said, that was my unit. I was in there sniping. Now, that was a really bad time in America. The military people were spit on by the general public. They were called baby killers. It was horrible. I was very angry about it because they were doing what their government asked them to do. So if you wanted to take it out on someone, you should have, which some of them did, work on the government and not take it out of these military people. There are more handicap, PTSD, killings, homeless people from the Vietnam War because of how the general public treated them. But what Bill said is when you were there, you had to believe in what you were doing to do it properly. And most of the people, the military people over there, felt that way. He went back after 3 weeks. There was an opening, but he always said it was too soon. They made him a department chairperson, and then he started using the GI Bill for school. And he went back to school for I don't know how, a number of years. And he got his administrative certificate and then was made an assistant principal. He had to give up his coaching. He coached baseball. He went 3 years without losing a game in baseball. When first time he lost a game, he came home and he says, the pressure's off. We lost. And he had winning football teams. But when you were administrator, you had to give up coaching in our school district. And he became a much loved assistant principal. And when he got back, we proceeded to continue applying for a child. And I remember I called the Suffolk County Social Service Department. We had a caseworker, and it was in the beginning of August in 1971. And I said, I have to go back to work. Can you tell me if you have a child for us? And this was the time when the abortion laws had just come into effect. So there were not as many children available as before. And she said to me, oh, no, no, go back to work. There's nothing. 1 week later, she called and she said, we have an infant girl for you. Do you want her? Of course we do. And we went and picked her up. We named her Trudy Heather Payne. She has been a joy in our life. We could have never asked for a more wonderful person. I was about 27, 28 when we did that adoption. And when I was 31, I got pregnant. And 7.5 months later, William Andrew Payne was born. And he was very ill. He had a respiratory. His lungs were not developed. A year or two before that, the Kennedy, when JFK was president, they had a baby boy that died of the same condition. So I was aware of that. But Billy, as we ended up calling him, was very strong. And he was in the hospital 3 or 4 weeks. And then he came home, and he is now 50 years old.
Greatest invention in your whole life? What's the greatest invention that you've seen?
The greatest thing was probably landing on the moon, but that didn't change my life particularly. I was in Europe with a girlfriend. Bill was in Vietnam, and I went there, and we visited my family in the Netherlands. And she had ordered a Mercedes in this country. And it was made in Stuttgart, in the factory in Stuttgart, Germany, by American standards. And we had to pick up her Mercedes and drive it across borders, because there were borders. Every time you got to a border in Europe, you had to go through all this stuff and have the paper stamped. And then after we finished, we dropped it back off at the factory, and they would send it back to the States as a used car. We had to drive it 1,000 kilometers. But we were in Stroudsburg, Austria, a beautiful little town. And we were walking around, and every store had a TV in the windows, because not everybody had TV. And again, that was the time of Vietnam. Even the Europeans had a negative aspect of that whole situation. And when they were landing on the moon, the people were all out looking in the windows, and they saw that we were Americans, and they all came over and hugged us and told us how proud we must be about being American. It was one of the only positive times that you felt good about being American, because everybody was so negative about the Vietnam War. And that was really a wonderful feeling, a real great feeling.
JFK, where were you when he was shot?
That was my last day of student teaching. That must have been fall, November of 1963. And I got home from student teaching in Connecticut, and my girlfriend and I had rented each a separate room in this retired person's house. And I just sat there and watched the TV for a while. And then I said, well, there's nothing I can do. So I went back to school, which was about 50 minutes away. And I picked up Bill, and I think we went down to New Jersey because it was Thanksgiving weekend. That was a shock.
So 9/11, bring me to that, because you were in New York.
Our neighbor was a trainer for the New York Islanders, and they were doing their fall or summer camp up in Lake Placid, New York. And we were good friends with them. So he said, I'm bringing my camper up. He said, and I'm taking my wife. Why don't you guys come up and the three of you can hike and do what you're supposed to do? And then if I have free time, so forth. And we got up that morning, and the three of us, Bill and MG and myself, were supposed to climb up the mountain. We got up, and all of a sudden, someone was banging on our door. And it was another person camping there, and they were saying, put the TV on, put the TV on. So we did, and we saw the planes crash into the second building. And those people that were banging on our door, Bill stayed in contact with them for many years. And every 9/11, they would send emails back and forth, just that day. And of course, then later we lost contact with them. So we sat there till about 11 in the morning, and we said, well, there's nothing we can do. Let's go climb the mountain. So the three of us went over to climb the mountain, and we were going to take the chairlift down. Well, we got partway up the mountain, and Bill said, I'm not climbing up anymore. There was a little place there, it was closed, and he said, I'm just going to sit here. So we got up to the top, and everything had shut down. Everything. So we're up the top, and the chairlift wasn't going, the whole country shut down. So we had to walk back down. A couple days later, we drove back home, and we went across, as we always did, the Throgsneck Bridge to get to Long Island, and you could look over at Manhattan and see the smoke still rising. And because Bill was a volunteer fireman, a lot of the volunteer firemen on Long Island were also, their job was a paid fireman in New York City. And there were a lot of funerals that people out where we were had to go to.
Happiest time in your life. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Happiest time.
I had a lot of happy times. I guess when I married Bill, when we had our children, just my whole life was wonderful. We retired at 55 because you could do that in New York. I was going to work till I was 60. Bill was retiring at 55 no matter what. And then in January, I got a call from my daughter Trudy, who told me that the following October I would be a grandma. And I thought, I didn't want to be a Christmas and Easter grandma. I wanted to be a grandma whenever I could be a grandma. So I retired that summer also, the same time Bill did. And we traveled for 20 years all over the world. And then he got sick. Had I waited 5 years, we wouldn't have had all that wonderful time together. I think as you get older, you look at things differently. I came down here to take care of my parents because they had moved here permanently. And then we were camping most of the time. But then we bought the house in Venice, Florida, and have been very happy down here. No matter what situations occurred, you can face everything that you need to face in life and be grateful for your life. Try to not take things too seriously. Try to relax. Don't be a perfectionist like me. And just try to enjoy life more. And that's not easy when you're bringing up a family because you want everything to be perfect. You want to do everything right. It's not going to happen. You're going to make mistakes. That's what makes you wiser. So just kind of chill out. From somebody that didn't know how to chill out for many years.